Vanderbilt family had more money than the US Treasury at one time. And yet, after Cornelius Vanderbilt died and passed the money on to his son, it took 9 years to double that estate, but then his son died, and that was the last time that estate grew. It actually just started to diminish. And within 54 years of that time, the first Vanderbilt died broke. I started in the financial services field by basically peddling life insurance initially and mutual funds. And then in the year 2000, when the market started to go down, that's when my real education began. And I started to figure out, like, how do I help people become more efficient with their money and plug financial leaks and get their financial house in order? And that was kind of what it evolved to. And then really got into the world of financial coaching and organization, and a little bit less on the product side as time went on, and referred all that out. Sold that business in 2021, did a comedy special because why not? Sounds like a midlife crisis to a degree, going and doing comedy, but we actually filmed a comedy special that got picked up and it'll come out in 2024. And then touring around with my new book and doing a lot of speaking and a children's book coming out. So yeah, I like to do anything that, I end up either writing or being on stage, it seems. And when I was 5, that was my favorite thing, was to family parties. My uncles were hilarious, and it just always felt like love and celebration. And so I went to Italy for a summer, had some downtime, and my wife made the mistake of saying I was kind of funny, which I translated to like, I'm a comedic god, because I made her kind of laugh. And then I was introduced as being hilarious at an event that I spoke at, told some jokes, went well, so I took it up as a hobby. Did my first open mic August of 2017. That went pretty well. Started opening for some comedians that were mainly performing in Utah. And then in 2019, when they filmed their special, there was an agent there and was like, man, I've never seen someone do what you're doing around money. I think that you should do something around that. And finally, November of 2020, I'm like, I want to film a comedy special, and went all in, called The American Ream, drop the D, and it's about the ream, and it's a lot around money, a little bit around my family and upbringing, and some mostly real stories about that. And man, I've just had a blast doing that. I definitely haven't made money on the comedy special. I have, however, been hired by a handful of firms to do comedy at financial events, and they pay me like anywhere from 18 to 25 grand to do that, depending on how much time I was on stage or whether I wrote a roast and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's not lucrative, but it was pretty good for something that started as a hobby. As far as the special, I'm deep in the hole right now, but we'll see what happens as it starts streaming, and if that turns around or if it just builds the brand up. If it does nothing but what it did so far, it was one of the best investments of my life as far as enjoyment and fun and challenging and all those things. Yeah, so June of 98, I started in Guardian Life, right? And basically they called it an internship. I got paid a couple $1,000 a month and had to kind of earn the commissions over time for that monthly salary. But I was 19 years old, still in college, and it gave me some time to make some mistakes as far as, just putting people in the market, not knowing enough about it. And then when the year 2000 market started to decline, that's when, again, I was like, okay, what am I really going to do? And I just started traveling everywhere, every single month that I could, to find out who are the brightest financial minds and utilize my young age to be able to interview them and figure out better ways and even get them to do some business with me. I just was like intellectually curious and ferocious about learning. And so in 2006, I dropped my Guardian FR, field representative contract, because I was actually teaching at events that Guardian agents were hosting, and they didn't want me to do that. And I wanted to launch a radio show, and they didn't want me to do that because of compliance. And I wanted to write a book. And so I was like, look, I'm going to move more towards a monthly membership to start this kind of movement of what we called the producer revolution, to help people learn how to create more value and embrace this producer paradigm versus a consumer condition. So one of abundance versus scarcity. And that really kind of took off. And that's when I became more in the intellectual property and coaching world, and kind of building financial teams that I referred these people out to so that they could get the transactions done from the education, because I wasn't going to be able to provide all that. I tried early on, but had a little boutique mortgage firm, a boutique property and casualty firm. And what I found was I was never going to do the very best thing for clients because I didn't have the wherewithal and the bandwidth and the staying power or the passion for those things. And so it was great just to find people that was their jam. That's what they love to do, and refer to them. Free Flow Group, it's really using entertainment to educate. And I'm finally, after all these years, building up my personal brand. Heard those things were started, 20 years ago? Finally, a little late to the party, but I love to write. So Even I'm behind there, but I'm ahead of the curve, hopefully on the entertainment to educate type of side. And so it's really Free Flow Group as a media company using intellectual property to educate the world, but also financial advisors. And I just hosted a 2-day event for 25 financial advisors at my house because back in the day, I used to have a study group, got to 180 people before my business partners died in a plane crash in '06. And I just forgot how much I enjoyed that because there's a lot of kind of leverage in helping them and see all the impact it makes for them helping their clients. So really, I've got a comprehensive financial services firm using software to help support that entire process and the education, the media company, and then, teaching people in the financial industry. So those are kind of the 3 legs of what I'm up to right now. The economic value of certainty. I just finished rewriting What Would the Rockefellers Do and put my version of that economic value of certainty as a bonus chapter at the end to kind of honor him and what he taught me, but also use my personal stories to make it more kind of current and in my voice. His article was basically talking about if you're financially independent, where you have enough cash flow to cover your expenses, then you've got this certainty, which means you can swing for the fences in other aspects and areas of your life, knowing that that's handled. So his article said, imagine if you had a 10-year government contract, you knew that was coming in every single month. How'd that change how you operate? Because you knew predictably the money was coming in. You didn't have to just go earn it the next day. So it was really an argument for cash flow and to limit risk because so many people were chasing returns and having volatility and waiting for 30 years to find out if it was going to work out. But then they are on this roller coaster ride of emotion up and down. He said, what happens when you have certainty? Is there's actually an economic value that you could be more productive knowing that your foundation is set. And because the foundation isn't sexy or something people really like focus on sometimes and they neglect it, it creates that unintentional risk that actually starts to hijack their mindset and they're less abundant, less innovative, less creative because they feel more at risk. And so that's what certainty does for us, is it lets us make choices knowing that something's there for us because we're not worried and that fear doesn't override our thinking. And then that when we have those clear thoughts, we can think more in the world of serving others and solving problems and creating value. So that certainty actually lets us become more productive. There's an economic value to that stability. Like those first couple of years that the book was out, we just had this like hardcover copy and we were putting it up on Amazon for $1,000 because I wanted people to come to us and drove them to our website and try to get my co-author Mike on stages. So it was a little bit slow because of our model and our pricing. And then we put it out as a paperback for like $10 and started to promote it at my old firm Wealth Factory. And then all of a sudden it sold hundreds of thousands of copies because advisors were buying it like in the dozens at a time and giving it to clients. And the whole concept was the Vanderbilt family had more money than the US Treasury at one time. And yet, after Cornelius Vanderbilt died and passed the money on to his son, it took 9 years to double that estate, but then his son died, and that was the last time that estate grew. It actually just started to diminish. And within 54 years of that time, the first Vanderbilt died broke. They had all these mansions in New York that have either been torn down or sold to other people. They own the breakers in Rhode Island. They don't anymore. They own the Biltmore estates in the Carolinas. That's all gone because they learned to kind of be wealthy socialites instead of value creators. And so they destroyed one of the largest, amounts of money adjusted for inflation in history. Yet the Rockefellers are on their 6th generation of passing on wealth. They're worth $20 billion or more. They have around 200 people benefiting from the trust, but not as trust fund babies. So what were the differences between the Rockefeller family and the Vanderbilt family is what the study of the book is. And so I go, from side to side, kind of looking at the differences and nuances, and then just talk about what are the most simple things that anybody could do, because there's not very many people wealthy as the Rockefellers. So how can we borrow from some of that knowledge to make different financial choices today? And it's number one, what's the simplest thing you could do? Then number two, what's the next thing you could do? And then we get into some legacy factors, like creating a family constitution that's these philosophies and interests that you have personally, and you leave a signpost inside of your trust for future generations. And then use life insurance, death benefit to replenish that trust over time so the next generation isn't born into, financial bondage again. And so the book's really about insurance heavily in the first version. The second version still has those kind of core pieces, but I've added a little bit more depth on the legacy side. 10 years from the time my business partners and I wanted to write our first book, and then it's almost 10 years since I first wrote What Would the Rockefellers Do. It's now more like what would the wealthy do, because I looked at not just the Rockefellers, but looked at like what Walt Disney did with how he handled some of his finances, and the Kennedy family and how they handled things, and just keep saying, how does this apply to the common person, not just the uber wealthy? And so it's about a third longer than the first version, but with a lot of like depth on that legacy side that I just didn't really have the wherewithal and understanding at the time I first wrote it, that I've now learned over a lot of client interactions and a lot of conversations and study since the first version. Sometimes they even show my book on there when they're doing it. Other times they don't. They do these, like I've had people that I've coached that do little mini documentaries on it. The thing is, I created the context, but I didn't create the concept. I wrapped it really well in the book, and I'm glad that it kind of inspired. The reason that book sold so many copies were financial advisors buying it. So I can't really feel like I missed the boat because I didn't do TikTok. It's just not in my personality at this point. The main thing is that there's this family legacy ring that I write about, which is number one, the family office, which I talk about in the first version. But because most people aren't worth $300 million, they can't just afford to have their own financial team that works exclusively for them. So it's how do you build out that office and why that's important and how you work towards that over your life. Then the second thing is the family retreat structure, which is your rituals, your traditions, and the symbols that every major organization and religion have, but most families neglect these days. But if you start to get that, you start to solidify the chances of the wealth staying from generation to generation. Here's the things that we've learned, and here's some signposts we want to leave behind. And these are just statements and philosophies that you can use as guidance to be more dynamic as you build a board of trustees that once you're gone, help kind of navigate this whole thing rather than just legalese. And so I really invested more time in that family constitution side of things and sharing some pieces that I did in the first book. I shared kind of like extracted some of those pieces. This time I'm giving an entire workbook for everybody that buys the book. It's called the Legacy Toolkit, where they get the full structure of how to build family retreat, where they get the full structure of how to build family constitution, and they get the building blocks for building a trust and paying their kids and teaching them how to be more wise with money. And so that's a whole other dimension. I think that if I were to be critical of the first book is I just spent a lot of time on properly structured overfunded whole life insurance, and I didn't even say it that clearly, but I did kind of get a little bit redundant in talking about that. So I was able to take out a little bit of that redundancy and instead dedicate it to some of these legacy aspects, because the feedback we got on the book last time was these legacy things really changed the way I view my family and my money when it comes to passing it on for generations. And I'm like, well, that's pretty amazing considering I wrote the book primarily to pitch insurance initially. And somehow it has almost 2,200 reviews on Amazon that are like 4.6 stars. Not bad for a book primarily about insurance. So I thought it merited the dedication towards legacy that also encapsulates a lot of the Rockefeller method and what other wealthy people do to get past the third generation. Yeah, and my attorneys have influenced me on these concepts over the years, sharing things that are in the book. Like there's a letter from Henry Phipps that started Bessemer Trust, which came from being part of the Andrew Carnegie companies. And so like just seeing how they grew to $10 billion inside of that from the money they started with, and how they left signposts versus mandates. And so these attorneys have helped me see if you have a decent amount of wealth, you can look at an asset protection trust, which means it's irrevocable, yet you get to choose your distribution trustee, so you still have access to your money, and you can follow the Rockefeller tenet of own nothing, control everything. And so all of a sudden you can move things out of your estate without having it be out of your touch or out of your reach, which a lot of the kind of planning of the past kind of had. Having that as kind of the centerpiece, and for wealthier people, having some type of holding company that then owns their interest in other companies as they have additional ventures and investments and things like that. So it kind of flows through to the main holding company to simplify from a tax perspective, and also to be able to maximize the tax write-offs in the holding company without having partners in the other companies feeling like you've overtaken the profitability through tax deduction. I know that's kind of a mouthful, but I found a good handful of attorneys that just really buy into what I'm talking about in this, because before they even read the book, we're already setting up legal structures consistent with what I'm teaching about, because it was really from attorneys that I learned about the Rockefeller method from the trust aspect and how that was set up. And if you're really wealthy, maybe it's offshore trust, but for the most part, I like to see domestic trusts, even though they don't provide quite as much security, but they're not quite as onerous to get to your money and those factors. So I have a handful of attorneys that could implement everything that I'm talking about in the book, like no problem, understand it. They're all congruent and aligned with different firms. Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you're enjoying these videos, well, there's good news. More where that came from, so go ahead and click through and watch the next video now.